Good morning, LMS. Today we are going to have our fourth SEL lesson for the month of September, which is going to be on communication. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to answer the question, how do I effectively communicate what I need and how I am feeling? We're going to start today's lesson with a little bit of a review of the steps of self-awareness. Reminder, the first step of self-awareness is to identify. So we need to identify how you feel using one of the 4 zones of regulation. The first of the 4 zones is the red zone, which is used to describe an extremely heightened state of alertness and really intense emotions. So in this zone, you might feel things like anger, rage, devastation, or terror. The next zone is the yellow zone, which in the yellow zone, you're normally also in a heightened state of alertness, but you have a lot more control over what you're feeling. Somebody in the yellow zone might feel stressed. They might feel frustration, excited, a little silly, or get the wiggles when they're in the yellow zone. The green zone is what we use to describe a calm state of alertness. So somebody who is in the green zone might be happy, focused, content, or ready to learn when there. And then finally, the blue zone is used to describe the low states of alertness, like feeling sad, tired, sick, or disengaged, aka being bored. The second step is to regulate. So using the tools that we talked about last week and your coping strategies to exert control over one's own emotional state. That might be taking a break, going to get a drink of water, going for a walk, different things like that. And the final state is communication. So you need to be able to communicate how you feel, which is what our focus is going to be on today. Today is going to be mostly about communication. So I want you to take a moment to figure out what zone of regulation are you in right now. Take a minute, pause this video, and figure out, are you in the blue zone, green zone, yellow zone, or red zone? Just a reminder, there are no right answers to this question. Any zone that you feel right now is okay, it's acceptable, and sometimes you might be a combination of the two. So it's also good to know that as well. Also, throughout the day, you might jump zones. So maybe you start out in the green zone and then you jump really fast to the red zone or vice versa. So that is always a good thing to do. You might want to word it in this particular way. I am currently feeling in the yellow zone because I was having tech issues this morning and got frustrated, or something along those lines. Feel free to pause the video now to discuss with your class what zone you are currently feeling. Now that we're back from that discussion, we're going to figure out which zone of regulation do you best communicate in. Once again, there is no right answer for this. Some of you are going to communicate better in the green zone. Some of you might communicate better in the yellow zone or the red zone or the blue zone. There is no right answer to this question. I know personally for me, this discombobulated voice, I know I communicate best when I'm in the green zone because I'm not stressed and I can articulate my thoughts more clearly. However, for some of you, you might feel that you articulate your thoughts best when you're in the yellow zone or when you're transitioning from blue to green. All of this is valid, but let's take a minute to try to figure out which zone of regulation you best communicate in. Go ahead and pause and talk about it in your classrooms. So now that we've established what zone of regulation works best for us and where we're in order for communication, but also for us this morning, let's talk about the ways we communicate. So let's try to answer the question, how do we communicate? As a whole group, you are going to come up with a list of different ways that people communicate. This might be general ideas like talking, or maybe you want to get more specific with the ways that you communicate with your friends. That is always a good thing to remember there. Now, once again, you all communicate differently, but sometimes we have expected methods of communication and unexpected methods of communication. For an example, an expected method of communication might be emailing a teacher, or it might be using nice words to a fellow classmate. While an unexpected means of communication might be something like yelling or a negative tone of voice. So keep that in mind as you're writing. We do have some expected versus unexpected behaviors. Teachers, feel free to write both down because they are both valid forms of communication. But please take a couple minutes now to discuss among your class how are the ways we communicate. So go ahead and pause this video. Now that we're back, we're going to go over a couple ways that we as an LMS community might communicate. So the first would be things like spoken words, sounds, sentences, things like that. So basically when we speak face-to-face with someone, that is one of the hows of communications. It's one way that we communicate. The next is through written words and sentences. So that might be an email, a text, a social media post or Snapchat caption, or even a Schoology message. These are all valid ways to writtenly communicate with someone else. The next is things like gestures. So expected gestures might be things like hand raising, pointing, reaching for someone, a head nod or a head shake, or gaze shifting. So this would be if shifting would be if you are in a room with two teachers. Maybe there's a teacher in the front of the room who is talking, and then you have to shift the gaze to the back of the room when another teacher is talking as well. So knowing when and where our gaze is moving also is a way that we communicate. Next is facial expressions. So things like smiles, frowns, smirks, annoyed looks on your faces. All valid ways to communicate. Obviously, some are more expected than others, so we do need to keep that in mind. But these are also all valid hows of communication. And finally, we have body language. So body language are things like your proximity to people, or are you invading their personal space? Do you have an open or a closed posture? Are you open facing the board, or are you kind of closed off? Maybe your arms are crossed, maybe you're hunched over, maybe your head is on your desk. That's a closed posture, as well as movement. Are we standing up and moving when the teacher says to transition, or are we getting up and moving at unexpected times? These are all valid forms of communication to let somebody know that you are hearing them and willing to discuss whatever is needed. Next, we need to think about why do we communicate? We just talked about how, so now let's talk about why. So for what reasons do we communicate? Similar to what we did before, you're going to build your own list as a class. Let's talk about it first. So some examples might be things like socializing or asking questions. Things like that are good places to start for your list. So once again, take a minute, make a list together, and pause this video. So similar to before, we have some whys of communications. So basically, here are some functions and reasons why we communicate. So we might communicate to protest or to request. So let's say we're unhappy with a grade, so we go to theoretically protest it, and we go to request help for it. We communicate to make choices or to comment on things. Within the classroom, we communicate to ask questions or to clarify pieces of information that our teachers are going over. We also greet each other through communication. Additionally, other forms of communication could be like singing and choral responses. If your teacher does a repeat after me and asks you to repeat with them in order to help you remember something, that's a form of communication. Sharing information is also a really important way that we communicate, as well as answering questions. So sometimes we have to ask them in the classroom, but other times our teachers ask us a question and we have to answer them. Another valid form of communication. And then finally, showing off. Sometimes we just want attention, and we communicate it by blurting out and doing some of those unexpected methods of communication. However, that is still an important reason why. That helps us understand where you're coming from. So basically, what is the point? Why are we learning about how to communicate with each other? Well, when we talk about communication, it's because it's something that we need to work on constantly. Your teachers need to work on it. You need to work on it. Even me. I need to work on communication as well. When we communicate, it does have an effect on our personal zones, the zones of others, and it can impact our relationships with people either positively or negatively. For example, if you know that you're not in the right zone of communication and you start to yell at someone, that increases their zone of regulation as well. Maybe they were in a green zone and then you're starting to bump them up to a yellow zone just by yelling at them. However, the reverse could happen. Maybe somebody's in the yellow zone or the red zone, they're having a really bad day, and something nice you say, something nice you communicate helps to bring them down. This is just a gentle reminder. Nobody is good at every method of communication, not even me. We all have our favorites, and those are ways that we communicate better than others. So maybe you communicate better by writing out a nice email. You might communicate better face-to-face. If you're having those problems, knowing how you communicate the best will help to alleviate any conflict you have and help keep those steady relationships that we all need to have a good school. Also, if we figure out which methods of communication we're really good at and then practice the other ones that are harder for us to use, we can learn how to communicate our feelings and our needs more effectively. And then we have more strategies in our toolbox. The more we work on these strategies that we need to work on and we let people know that these are strategies we need to work on, the better off we'll be and the more helpful we can be to everyone. Because maybe you're really good at written communication, but your friend isn't, and you can help your friend. So now what I would like you to do is to complete this exit ticket. It is a Google form, so go ahead and scan the QR code that is on the board, or if you need to type in the little hyperlink right down below, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation, and I hope to get to communicate with all of you soon.